Minimum viable is often defined as it works. It does the thing that it's supposed to do, and that's it. If you define the MVP process in a way that actually creates a successful product, then it might be a little more fruitful, but I think it's being abused in the industry.
You see MVP as an ongoing process. What happens when good enough to ship becomes good enough to stay? When somebody builds an MVP and then you don't get back around to it to fix it.
The reason why an MVP wouldn't get iterated on is because vision, the data, is guiding to a different location, and so the MVP stays in place.
Get out there, see what works, and improve from there. What do you think about that?
Iterate and improve is how everything needs to be functioning. Everything needs to be iterate and improve.
Welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Paladino.
Now, what if building fast was the very thing holding your product back? In this episode, Nick and I are going to take on one of the most polarizing topics in product development, the minimum viable product.
It's the definition of the MVP that matters the most here, because you're really thinking about what is minimum viable. Define that. Like, if you make minimum viable something that is exceptional, like Nakul Goyal in our a previous episode from Carfax redefined minimum viable as minimum lovable. And how do you measure lovable? That's for Nakul to help and share with. But if you define the MVP process in a way that actually creates a successful product, then it might be a little more fruitful. But I think it's being abused in the industry, where the concept of the minimum part is prevailing over the viable part. And so minimum viable is often defined as it works. It does the thing that it's supposed to do, and that's it. It shows the image.
Well, and I think that's gotten sped up by tools like Lovable and those where anybody can vibe code now and produce something really fast. Who defines minimum in your mind, and how?
So the who would be likely. Now, it depends on organization size, actually, first of all. But I think the minimum is going to be defined by the developer pretty much exclusively. Now, maybe the requirements are going to take away and chop away at some of the important bits and say, okay, well, we don't necessarily need this for version 1. We don't need to create, dynamic rendering or whatever it is, because that adds weeks or even months to the process. So we're going to chop that out. So, but even those decisions are really truly made by the developer, even if somebody in front of the developer made that decision, because it's about what the developer can achieve in the quickest manner that creates the minimum. So if you have the most exceptional developer in the world and they function at a speed 10x that of anybody else, then maybe your minimum becomes a much higher bar. If you are working with a whole bunch of junior developers that have no practical experience, then your definition of minimum is exceptionally low. Like, does it work in a regular situation?
But that seems like it defines it based on what is possible or what is accomplishable, if that's a word, in the amount of time, and kind of doesn't factor in the customer perspective, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's exactly where it comes from. Like, if we prioritize the viable, then you want to make sure that the KPIs are positive rather than the idea is positive. We've talked about it a lot, product bias. Product bias is probably the number one reason why MVPs continue to prevail in I'm going to start calling it like low minimum. We'll say low minimum and high minimum. High minimum means you're sitting there and it's an exceptionally delivered first version. Low minimum is, we'll call it lazy. So low minimum is going to be when product just simply wants to continue to ship wins over and over and over again, and you get a bunch of low minimum products. That's going to create this concept that over and over and over again, product bias prevails. And, to rehash product bias, it's basically when you have such a commitment that your idea is successful that you find its success. I heard just yesterday, I was talking to a director of a very large brand, and he said that the concept of A/B testing that does this is called finding the green, which you're literally looking through the data for any indicator. You don't have to have a consistent method. You just look through the data for any indicator that says, this is green, let's go forward. That is product bias in its most truest form, because all you're doing is you're cherry picking, literally, and ignoring indicators that say it's not successful. And you're finding a way that low minimum is worth it to deploy, because what you want to be able to do is say to your leadership team, I've deployed 7 features and they're all valuable. Instead, if you're humble enough to be able to say, I have tested 7 features and one of them was valuable, we did that one. What is the true mark of success here for a mature product team? Which of the two? And is it simply that one of the methodologies converts better than the other? And let's hypothetically say the one that is better is the one with 7 low minimums versus the one with 1 high minimum. I don't know, right? What's the better variation? And how do you assess the difference between that and the concept? And I think this is where a lot of the controversy comes from. Does the seven searching for greens create a better experience than 1, it's definitely green? I think it's kind of the 1 instead of the 7 personally. I think that methodology is going to win out long, long before product bias allows itself to create product bloat. To rehash product bloat real quick, that's when you have feature over feature over feature that exists on a page or a site or a platform. And you vet each one individually, you prove out its value, whether it's with good data science or bad data science. And as you're proving that out, you are not assessing the diminished value of the previous products. By not assessing the diminished value of the previous products while deploying the newest, right? Like you validated that the recommendations carousel at the top of the page is super valuable, but now you're going to kick that down to the bottom in a new test because you're going to instead replace it with sponsored products instead of recommendations. So sponsored products then comes up to the top. That proves out to be more valuable. But now your results aren't additive because you've removed the value of recommendations. So is the recommendations carousel that's now at the bottom of the page still taking up time, still adding to the page weight, adding to the bloat? Is it as valuable, or is it less valuable, or is it more valuable? It's unlikely to be more valuable, but maybe it is. Maybe you put it right at the right part of the page where now all of a sudden the recommendation is more valid because maybe they're looking through the product and they're sifting through reviews and they say, okay, I do like this. What else do I need? And then recommendations is right below there. It's exactly what they need. And then they start to add the accessories with which are recommended because your recommended products are exceptionally recommended. And so a lot of these concepts kind of really blend together to be able to answer the question about MVP is really figuring out how you continuously measure the success of all of these products, and you don't stop remeasuring the success of previous deployments. That's where this problem really comes into play.
So the catalyst for this conversation came from a post on LinkedIn. And this was taken more from the marketing standpoint, because I think this is a marketer, CMO named Clark Barron. He says, I hate the very concept of producing a minimum viable product with every fiber of my being, and you should too. So he's obviously not a fan. And then he goes on to say, because when a company builds an MVP, they force marketing to do something unnatural, make unfinished things look finished. And once you've done that long enough, you forget what finished even means. Marketing teams start treating everything, campaigns, launches, even brands, like experiments instead of commitments. So he goes on to make 3 points. MVP turns marketers into apologists. When your product barely works, every campaign becomes an act of damage control. MVP erases craftsmanship. You can't build a legendary brand around placeholders. You can't story tell a maybe. There's no mythos in a product that hasn't earned belief. And then the final point is MVP destroys marketing feedback loops. We've become addicted to testing. We don't commit to creative direction until we have data. But data doesn't guide vision. It documents hesitation. You can't learn anything meaningful about your market if you're testing a half-born thing. Every signal is noise. Every failure gets misdiagnosed as we haven't iterated enough instead of we shipped too soon. That's how marketers end up promoting a product that never should have existed in the first place.
I think it's missing the point. It's missing the point about the deployment cycle and what you need to do. I mean, if you're telling me that reading data, seeing negative indicators, finding a fix forward isn't part of what he's complaining about, then why complain about this? That is exactly what solves his problem. Like, is it a frustrating point? And by the way, this is like the difference between shipping CDs and shipping a website nowadays. Like I can iterate on a website very easy, so I can be quicker with it. That's the value of having an internet deployed piece of software. If I ship a CD with a bug, that's there kind of forever, unless I can update it with the internet. And so if he's basically saying the value of going back to monolithic deployments as stringent as having to ship CDs again back in the 90s, then he's missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that velocity allows us to keep up with the code, and it's not about minimum viable versus not. It's really about whether or not I have the aptitude to be able to fix forward correctly in a velocity fast enough to be able to keep up with my customers and innovate in front of my competitors. So it's a big miss. I don't think he's even talking about MVPs, honestly, at all. I think he's talking about something totally different. He's just blaming the MVP as the problem.
So, Nick, I think my favorite retailer and I need therapy.
You and another website?
I've waited 5 seconds for it to load. 5. I could have gone and brewed coffee.
That's a quick coffee maker, first of all, but that sounds like a performance issue to me.
Yeah, instead of communicating, it just spun.
So you left, I'm sure. Classic abandonment issue due to latency.
Exactly. And that's why the Lowe's SRE team built site speed targets with Blue Triangle, so their users don't get ghosted by loading icons.
This is 5 steps to faster pages and fewer heartbreaks, all in the context of improved experience and improved revenue.
In fact, we turned it into a free playbook.
It's like a couples therapy for your digital experience, for you and your website, Chuck.
So be sure to grab the 5-step site speed target playbook at bluetriangle.com/playbook.
Because love is patient, but users aren't.
Yeah, the one contrast I hear between you two is you see MVP as an ongoing process. One of the things we have talked about is what happens when good enough to ship becomes good enough to stay. When somebody builds an MVP and then you don't get back around to it to fix it and really get it to where it happens. Talk a little bit about that.
Now I'm realizing that he's contradicting himself, because he's basically saying that you're going to leave an MVP in its place and you aren't going to move on, then you're going to market around it. But I'm not allowed to iterate on that. And or value goes towards its most important area. So data is guiding vision by his exact problem. The reason why an MVP wouldn't get iterated on is because vision, the data, is guiding to a different location. And so the MVP stays in place. Now, is it okay that a bunch of half-baked products get left out on sites? Of course not. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for is that if the most valuable thing is to refine the MVP that just got shipped, then effort will stay there. And if it is not, effort will shift. And if the problem is just selling the story about why the value is inside refining the MVP, then the problem is the storyteller, not the platform, not the product.
Yeah, I think to your earlier point, he's assuming all of them are failures. By doing an MVP, it's not a good product. And we're basically, marketing is then left to put lipstick on the pig, is kind of how he views it.
Yeah, well, I think that's fundamentally just coming from a place of ignorance of the development lifecycle, the product lifecycle, really.
Let's switch gears then to a different example, Duolingo. So Jackson Shuttleworth, who is the product lead for retention at Duolingo, was a guest on Lenny's product podcast. And he talked about the success of MVPs. And it sounds like they think about it more like you think about it, that their approach is shipping early, testing copy changes like commit to my goal, and iterating quickly. And he talked about they started out thinking in terms of streaks because they deal with consumers, right? It's not a retailer, right? They have a product that somebody has to eventually buy. And so they talk about building streaks, and sometimes they got streaks wrong because they were building streaks for the purpose of streaks, so they could go measure how successful the product was, but putting the users through unnecessary hoops. So, but their point was perfecting every detail before shipping can lead to paralysis. They don't wait for everything to be perfect before launching new features. They tested ideas quickly, iterate based on user feedback. So your MVP doesn't have to be flawless. Get out there, see what works, and improve from there. What do you think about that?
If you are effectively using through iteration, iterate and improve is how everything needs to be functioning. Everything needs to be iterate and improve. Because otherwise, you're never going to understand your baseline. You're never going to understand what improvement even means. You're never going to know what success could even look like. So if I wait for that monolith, let's say you develop this great feature for 6 months and you refine and you refine and you refine and you refine in that process, in pre-prod, not in production. You're just refining for the sake of refining. How do you know that that effort is valuable? How do you know that that refinement actually needed to take place? What are you doing? Are you just closing an error that you saw in pre-prod? Are you creating a new feature because you took a 30-minute shower and had a good shower thought? So you're adding something to this in that 6 months. Like, what are you doing that's super valuable? Like, what baseline tells you this is what you do? To me, that sounds like the data is guiding the hesitation instead of the vision. The vision is about deploying quickly, understanding what didn't go correctly, and iterating and chopping into that, those same refinements over that same 6 month period. Now, to the credit of waiting for the monolith, if I am to wait that 6 months to make my deployment and be able to take it right at the very end, then I might fail to be able to get to that same mark at the 6 month point. However, if I stay focused on my product and I deploy, let's say 1 month time is my initial iteration, and then I iterate and improve, I might be able to refine over the course of 4 weeks. And what took me 6 months to get there, I was able to do it in 2 months. It's all hypothetical. but I certainly could, because now I have production data that's going to allow me to iterate and improve. But it's all about iterating and improving and using the data to guide the vision.
So going back to Duolingo's point of view, and something you said, I'm going to connect the dots here, is you talked about the data validating what needs to get fixed. Their point was use the right data. That they initially used the wrong data, streaks, and they realized they were thinking about that wrong, which I think connects all of this beautifully to what Nakul Goyal said on our episode where he was talking about at Carfax. They changed that to minimum lovable product, because lovable suggests the data is the customer feedback, I would assume, right?
Yeah, but how do you even get the lovable? Like, how do you measure lovable without having production data? So if I find the minimum lovable product, that could mean that go find it. Go find lovable. Define lovable in your product. And that's, I guess, part of the art.
You know, remember when Amazon came out with one-click buying, and that was like everybody's head exploded? That kind of thing. What do you think?
My same problem still exists. I mean, first of all, lovable is an opinion. And so what does that really mean? Like, do I, the product manager, love it? That's all it takes, is once I love it, it's ready to ship? Or do I need to go do user studies that has a little prompt at the end? Do you love this? Yes. No.
So our conclusion in all this conversation is, it's just a lot of questions. What's an MVP? What's a product? What's a feature? What is viable? What is lovable? What is minimum?
I think it really more comes down to culture of how you're thinking about these things and what it actually means to create and iterate on your product. I mean, if I'm creating something brand spanking new right from scratch, and I'm trying to create a market for this brand spanking new thing, the concept of MVP is a way larger concept. So now we're really saying, what is the minimum product that has a market that is willing to purchase it? That's a lot different than iterating some feature on a website, like doing sponsored products versus something else, or adding an add to cart button. That's a very different concept. So now, is that what we want to really define an MVP as? Is shipping something brand spanking new, has no framework around it whatsoever, versus a digital product that exists within, effectively a feature within an experience? So again, it's coming back to definition, but it's all about culture of what you figure out. What is your iterate and improve, sell your story, sell your message. I'm just going to go back to the same concepts. It doesn't matter what we label it. It's about the culture with which surrounds it. If you're intentionally shipping things that are not proven, do not get supported by the data, doesn't matter if it's minimum or maximum. It's undersold. It's data doesn't guide vision if you're effectively misusing the data. If you are letting the data guide the vision, then you're going to fundamentally create better products. Doesn't matter if it's minimum or maximum.
So your bottom line is, it's all about the culture, less about the MVP. It's what is it, a culture that believes in building good products that have the data to support it, or is it a culture that is forcing stuff out because it's an unhealthy culture?
It's more about the culture is built around making the wrong people happy. If your culture is built around making your customers happy, you're going to find the proof in the data.
All right. Well, interesting topic. Maybe listeners will weigh in. That would be the best part. So if you've got an opinion on it, drop a comment below and we can start a conversation about it. Or feel free to reach out to Nick or I on LinkedIn. I am at Chuck Moxley and Nick is
at in Paladino, and we would love to hear who you think the MVP of this episode was.
Well, that wasn't a leading question. Okay. All right. Reach out. Tell us. Or tell Nick he's the best.
That's not what I meant.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode.